18. Cocaine Nights. The Porsche turned into the Calle Oporto, pausing to inspect the sunlight like a shark orientating itself above an unfamiliar seabed. I lay back in the Citroen's passenger seat, a copy of the Wall Street Journal over my chest, unnoticed among the dozing taxi drivers who used the shadow side of the street for their after-lunch siestas. The Sanger Villa stood across the road, windows shuttered, the surveillance camera fixed on the litter of cigarette packets and advertisement flyers in the drive. Pushed by the wind, they edged towards the graffiti-covered doors of the garage, as if hoping to be incorporated into this lurid collage. Crawford moved the Porsche at walking pace down the street and stopped to glance at the silent villa. I could see the tendons working on his neck, jaws clenched, while his lips mouthed whatever harsh words he had prepared for the psychiatrist. He accelerated sharply, then braked and reversed through the open gates. He stepped onto the unswept gravel and stared at the windows, waiting for Sanger to emerge and confront him. But the psychiatrist had abandoned the villa, resettling himself a mile down the coast in one of his bungalows at the Residencia Costa Sol. I had watched him leave the previous afternoon, sitting with the last of his books in a Range Rover driven by a middle-aged woman friend. He had closed the gates before leaving, but during the night, vandals had jimmied the locks on both the gates and the garage. Crawford walked to the roller door, seized the handle, and pulled it from the ground like an installation artist rolling up a hinged metal painting. He strode across the empty garage, avoiding the oil stains on the concrete floor, and let himself through the kitchen door into the house. My eyes turned towards the villa's chimney. For all my belief that Crawford was innocent of the Hollinger murders, I was waiting for the first wisps of smoke to lift into the sky. Frustrated to find that Sanger had evaded him, Crawford would soon work himself into a state of tension that only a quick blaze could assuage. I started the Citroen's engine, ready to swing the car into the drive and block the Porsche's escape. Fire and flame were the signature that Crawford would write once too often across the skies of Estrella de Mar. For 10 minutes, I sat behind my newspaper, almost disappointed not to see smoke billowing from the eaves. Leaving the car, I quietly closed the door and walked across the street to the villa. As I ducked into the garage, I heard a shutter open on an upstairs window. I hesitated in the kitchen, listening to Crawford's feet on the floorboards above my head. He was pulling a wardrobe across the room, perhaps adding a last piece of furniture to his bonfire pile. I stepped through the kitchen into the hall, its pale walls lit by the sunlight in the garden, once again the Piranesi antechamber where the psychiatrist had felt so at home. The vandals had continued their work inside the house, and aerosol slogans covered the walls and ceilings. On the stairs, the paint was still wet, the tiled steps smeared by Crawford's trainers. I paused on the upstairs landing, listening to the noise of scraping furniture. The bedrooms were daubed with graffiti, a riot of black and silver whorls, a demented EEG trace searching for a brain. But one room had not been vandalized, the maid's bedroom above the kitchen, where Crawford was easing a heavy Spanish dresser from the wall. Hands gripping the carved oak panels, he forced the castle of polished wood across the floor. Lying down in the narrow space behind the dresser, he reached to some inner ledge and retrieved a schoolgirl's diary bound in pink silk. Sitting against the dresser, he held the diary to his chest, smiling with the bittersweet regret of a schoolboy lover. I watched him as he untied the diary's bow and began to read its pages, fingers playing with the ribbon. He looked up at the little room, eyes lingering on the mantelpiece where a clutter of forgotten objects waited for the dustbin. A signed photograph of a punk rock group was taped to the wall beside a family of frizzy-haired trolls, a collection of shells and beach stones, and a postcard view of Malmo. Crawford stood up and leaned against the mantelpiece, running a hand across the stones, and then sat at the dressing table below the open window. "Come in, Charles," he called out. "I can hear you thinking. Don't hover out there like a ghost. There's one too many here already." "Crawford?" I stepped into the room and squeezed past the massive dresser. "I thought you might be starting a fire? Not today. And not here." He spoke softly and seemed almost dreamy and lightheaded, like a child discovering a secret attic. He explored the empty drawers of the dressing table, lips moving as he described the imaginary objects he had found. "This was Bibi's room. Think of the hundreds of times she stared into this mirror. If you look hard enough, you can just see her." He began to leaf through the diary, reading the large looping script that rolled across the pink pages. "Her moods and hopes book," Crawford commented. "She started it while she was living with Sanger. She probably wrote it here. It's a pretty little room." I assumed that he had never visited the house, let alone the bedroom. Concerned for him, I said, "Why don't you rent the house from Sanger? You could move in." "I'd like to, but why be mawkish?" Crawford closed the diary and pushed it away. A narrow servant's bed stood against the wall, stripped of everything but its mattress. He lay down, broad shoulders almost wider than the headboard. Not exactly comfortable, but at least they wouldn't have had sex here. "So, Charles, you thought I was going to burn the place down?" "It did occur to me." I stared at him through the dressing table mirror, noticing that his features were almost perfectly symmetrical, as if his face's asymmetric twin was hiding somewhere behind his eyes. "You set fire to the speedboat in my car. Why not this place? Or the Hollinger house?" "Charles," Crawford clasped his hands behind his head, deliberately revealing the surgical plaster on his forearm. He watched me in his level but friendly way, eager to help me over a minor difficulty. "The speedboat, yes, I have to keep the troops in good heart. It's a constant worry. A spectacular fire touches something deep inside us. I'm sorry about the car. Mahood misheard me and took off on his own. But the Hollinger house? Absolutely not, for one very good reason." "Bibi Jansen?" "Not exactly, but in a way." He left the bed and riffled through the diary, trying to restock his memories of the dead young woman. "Let's say a very personal way. You knew she was pregnant?" "Of course." "Were you the child's father?" Crawford paced around the room, carefully leaving a handprint on the dusty mirror. "Perhaps she'll see that the next time she looks out. Charles, it was scarcely a child. No brain or nervous system, no personality. Not much more than a parcel of genetic tissue, counting to 100. Not really a child, but it felt like a child." He pocketed the diary, took a last look at the room, and stepped past me. "It still does." I followed him to the staircase, past the airless bedrooms with their graffiti and stink of paint. I accepted Crawford's word that he was not responsible for the Hollinger fire, and felt curiously relieved. For all his restless swerves and undirected energy, there was no trace of malice about him, no hint of the dark, lurking violence found in the kind of psychopath who had planned to kill the Hollingers. If anything, there was an artless strain in him, an almost earnest need to please. "Time to go, Charles. Do you need a lift?" He noticed the Citroën across the street. "No, you were waiting for me here. How did you know I was coming?" "Just a guess. Sanger moved out yesterday afternoon. First the graffiti, then the torch. You underestimate me, Charles. I hope I'm a force for good in Estrella de Mar. Here's an idea. We'll go for a drive along the coast. There's something I want you to see. You'll be able to write about it." "Crawford, I have to..." "Come on, just give me half an hour." He took my arm and almost frog-marched me towards the Porsche. "You need cheering up, Charles. I see a kind of lingering malaise coming over you. Beach fatigue, pretty much endemic to the Costas. Fall into the clutches of Paula Hamilton and you'll be brain dead before you can reach your next gin and tonic. Now you drive. This car? I'm not sure. Of course, it's a puppy in wolf's clothing. It only bites out of enthusiasm. Hold the wheel like a leash and say, sit. I guessed that he had seen me in the Citroën when he first arrived, and that a spin at the controls of the Porsche was a gentle revenge. He watched me encouragingly as I eased myself into the driver's seat. I started the engine, missed the forward gears, and propelled the car towards the garage door. I braked in a swirl of litter, hunted the gearbox again, and eased the overeager car down the drive. Good, good. You're another Schumacher, Charles. It's fun being a passenger. The world looks different, as if one's seeing it in a mirror. Crawford sat with his hands on the dashboard, enjoying the erratic ride, and directed me through the narrow streets to the Paseo Maritimo. Now and then his hand gripped mine as he steered the Porsche around a swerving motor scooter, and I felt the overdeveloped thumb and index finger of the professional tennis player, the same combination that had left its imprint on my throat. Fingers, like keys, had a unique signature. I was sitting beside the man who had almost strangled me, and yet my anger had already given way to more confused emotions, a need for revenge, and curiosity as to his motives. He tapped the girl's diary on his knee, amused to see that I had reined in the powerful car and declined to show off its performance. As we approached the harbor, I noticed his almost childlike pleasure in everything around him, my modest driving skills, a water skier in the bay slaloming in and out of a speedboat's wake, elderly tourists marooned on a traffic island. All prompted the same cheerful smile, as if you were seeing the world afresh at every street corner. We drove along the lower Corniche towards Marbella, past the beach bars, boutiques, and creperies. At the western limits of Estrella de Mar, a mole of concrete blocks jutted into a sea. A truck loaded with fairground booths sped towards us, and Crawford seized the wheel, turning the Porsche into its path. His foot crushed mine against the accelerator, throwing the car forward as the truck's klaxon blared past us. Missed! Crawford waved to the driver and steered the car onto the sandy verge beside the mole. A small errand, Charles. It won't take a moment. He stepped from the car, inhaling the bright spray as the waves broke among the blocks. Still dazed by our close escape, I looked down at my bruised foot. The yellow paint on the toe cap of my shoe echoed the cleat marks of Crawford's trainer, the same print that I had seen stamped into the scattered soil on Frank's balcony. Shielding his eyes with the diary, Crawford gazed across the peninsula at the gutted shell of the Hollinger house. A year from now, some hotel or casino complex will stand there. On this coast, the past isn't allowed to exist. I locked the car and stood beside him. Why not keep the house as it is? As a tribal totem? A warning to all those timeshare salesmen and nightclub touts? That's not a bad idea. Buffeted by the wind, we walked to the rail at the end of the mole. Crawford glanced for a last time at the diary, smiling as he turned the pages of childish scrawl. He closed it, held it behind his head, and tossed it far out into the waves. A long, deep serve. So, that's done. I wanted to find the date where she mentioned the baby. Now I know how old it was. He stared at the waves rolling in from North Africa, ice-cold crests sweeping towards the shore. Cocaine coming in, Charles. Thousands of lines. Out of Africa, always something white and strange. I leaned against the rail and let the spray cool my face. The loose pages of the diary were churning in the foam beneath us. Pink petals dashed among the concrete blocks.